Okay, thank you everyone, and welcome to the first Portage webinar, Data Management and the Transition to NDRIO Update. My name is Melanie Parlett-Stewart, and I'm the Training Coordinator for Portage. I just wanted to let you know that we do have a couple of Portage staff in the chat available, so if you're encountering technical difficulties, you can post your questions into the chat, and they'll do their best to answer any questions that you might have. The Portage Network is an initiative of the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. It has the goal of building research data management (RDM) capacity in Canada through a network of experts in a growing community of practice. Jeff Moon is the director of Portage, a national library-based network launched by the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping issues so that everyone is on the same page as we work our way through the webinar. So you might have noticed that you'll be muted when you enter the room. So if you wish to speak or if you have something that you'd like to add, you can add an additional information there. This webinar may be recorded and the chat may be archived for those who are unable to attend. We encourage you to use the latest version of Zoom so that you can have access to all of the features. And as I mentioned, we encourage you to use the chat feature if you're having technical difficulties or have additional resources to share. We ask that you use the Q&A option to ask questions of the presenters. We're going to address questions at the end, and you may also raise your hand at that point if you'd like to ask a question. Questions may be asked in English or French. This webinar is being conducted with the CARL Code of Conduct in mind. You can find the complete Code of Conduct at the following URL, and we'll post that into the chat. CARL is committed to providing a welcoming, safe, and harassment-free environment for its staff, membership, committees, and working groups, as well as for participants, speakers, and organizers of CARL meetings and events. We do not tolerate harassment of any kind. So we're just going to practice a couple of the features that Zoom offers just to make sure that everyone feels comfortable using them. So the first feature that we're going to practice using is the polling. So we've just posted a poll now. You should see that on your screen and you should be able to answer it. Jeff, I'm just going to turn off your screen sharing so that people can see the poll.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. I think it's just something we didn't realize. Can everybody see the poll now? Okay, I'm going to try that again. Let's try this. Here we go. Is the poll available now? Great. Fantastic. So I'm going to share those results so we can see where people are coming from today. Thank you so much. Another feature that we were hoping for people to try out today is raising your hand. Would everyone be able, maybe perhaps raise your hand if you have attended a conference call while working from home in your pajamas? Wonderful. Thank you all. Okay, and our last item that we wanted to check to make sure, it seems like everybody has got the hang of the chat, but if you wanted to, if you haven't tried out the chat yet, if there's something that you're looking to learn today, if you want to post that into the chat. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to hand things over to Jeff Moon. Jeff Moon is the director of Portage. Again, a national library-based network launched by the Canadian Association of Research Libraries with the goal of building capacity and coordinating RDM activities in Canada.
Can everybody see the screen there? Melanie, is the main screen showing now?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, welcome everyone. Bienvenue à tout le monde. Merci d'être venu. We're very pleased to have you here for the first official Portage webinar. And I'm looking forward to sharing some updates with you on Portage and NDRIO. And I'm also looking forward to gathering feedback and such from you at the end through the magic of the polling that you've already played with today. So thanks, Melanie, for mediating that. That was great. Just getting myself organized here if I can. So what we're going to cover today are three main things. One is we'll give you an update on Portage and COVID-19 and where we are with that. Update on a range of initiatives that we're working on. And then we're going to talk about data management in the context of the new Digital Research Infrastructure Organization, or NDRIO. So starting with Portage and COVID-19, I will say right off that Portage, the work of Portage has not been impacted on a day-to-day basis in a big way, because we were already working online. But there are a lot of other impacts that we've all felt, I know, and in response to some of those broader impacts of COVID-19, which are evident to anybody these days, Portage has reached out to CIHR as part of one of the tri-agencies to offer secretariat support for data management, planning, curation, deposit, or discovery related to newly funded projects. So that is something which we have not yet heard back on in any substantive way, but if we do, the Portage Secretariat will be working with CIHR to respond to those needs as best we can. The FERDR team as well has been in discussions with CRKN Quebec to determine how best FERDR could support the publishing of data related to COVID-19 research. And that is in conjunction with McGill University. Last Friday, we had the opportunity to meet with a number of people in the network of experts, touch base during these strange times, and I think there was a strong appetite for that. We had the pilot on last Friday with the Portage network of experts and working groups, and we're evaluating options to expand this to the broader community of practice. There were approaching 30 people in that water cooler chat or Zoom meeting. I'm not sure at all what it would look like with 200, so we're going to have to start thinking about how we could broaden access to that water cooler chat opportunity. So stay tuned. Webinars are another approach that we're taking. We had been planning these for some time, but we've accelerated launch of these webinars. These are just a sampling of ideas that we've had from the community and within the Secretariat for webinars coming up. So at the end of this session, there'll be an opportunity for you to vote on some of these and add any others that you may have in mind for future webinars. Before I go further, I'm just going to flag to you that there will be an invitation going out shortly for next week's webinar. It will be held, it'll be 2 webinars, one at 1 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, the 7th of April, en français, avec Guylaine Roquette from NDRIO, and a repeat of that same NDRIO update from Guylaine Arquette in English at 2 p.m. So it'll be about a 30-minute presentation by Guylaine in both cases, and time for questions afterwards. So that is our second webinar scheduled for next week, and an announcement of that should go out shortly. The other idea that we've had, and we'd like your feedback on, is the Portage Online Conference. I know that traveling to conferences is a non-starter these days. So we're thinking of what form and content would be appropriate for an online conference. So in terms of presentations, workshops, breakout discussions, the opportunity for you to present lightning talks if that was of interest, or anything else you've got in mind. So there'll be a poll for that as well at the end of this webinar. So your ideas are welcome, and Melanie is very interested in hearing back from you. So either in the chat here today or in future emails, just send your ideas through to Melanie, and we will take them into consideration for future opportunities. So in turning to the initiatives that we've been involved in, I suspect that most of you on this call are aware that a lot of the activities that Portage has been involved in to date revolve around responding to the Tri-Agency's yet to be announced RDM policy and around national discovery. And both of those, we'll dive a little bit deeper into where we are with those at this point. So in terms of the Tri-Agency policy, we have three elements: the institutional RDM strategy, data management plans, and deposit. And in each of these cases, we've come up with outputs like the strategy template, the DMP assistant through our partnership with the University of Alberta, and national multidisciplinary repository options through our relationship with Compute Canada for Further and with OHO Scholars Portal for Dataverse. We've also had a lot of work done on harvesting metadata into Further, and this is metadata from a variety of government, general, and domain-specific repositories to create a national discovery layer. And this is improving discovery of Canadian research data and metadata and code. It's breaking down repository silos and driving traffic to the existing repository sites. And it's creating interoperability between Canadian and international platforms. And in particular, we are working with the Open Air initiative in Europe to share our metadata so that it is available on their metadata platform for people to discover and have their discoveries driven to Canadian repositories through the metadata that Further has been aggregating. Turning to the institutional RDM strategy, this is one of the earlier outputs, I think probably fairly closely on the heels of the DMP Assistant launch. We developed and launched an RDM strategy template, and we've recently been working on launching a version 2.0 of that template. This revised template and guidance assume that the Tri-Agency policy has been launched. So even if we push this out there ahead of the Tri-Agency policy launch, it'll look as if it is a live policy. We'll feed into institutional planning and broader training initiatives so that we're more up to date on that front when we are working on helping institutions with this requirement. And it is currently being translated and formatted. So that should be available within the next week or so. Turning to data management planning, Portage is developing a number of discipline-specific DMP exemplars. Some of those have been completed, and you'll see more about them in a bit. And we also are working on a DMP-specific repository to eventually house those DMPs and other DMPs that are shared out through the DMP Assistant 2.0. We're also working with folks to customize DMPs, DMP templates by institution, by discipline, and by use case. Certainly that work has been somewhat halted as we wait for the launch of DMP 2.0, but that work is still underway. And one of the ways that that's underway is with the work toward developing some best practices around data management planning for Indigenous data. And to that end, Erin Clary, our curation coordinator, Mark Leggett from Research Data Canada, and Chantal Visdev from Ocean Networks Canada out at University of Victoria, attended the Canadian Polar Data Workshop and met with a number of people at that conference representing largely the Inuit communities to gather feedback on the template. So more is coming on that front. And we also, as I mentioned, DMP 2.0 is expected to be transitioned and launched sometime in the spring through the work of the University of Alberta and Portage. As I mentioned before, exemplars are coming soon, and those exemplars, there are 3 of them. The social science one is one that James Doiron from the University of Alberta developed. It's a bit of a homegrown, cultured in the lab kind of thing, mixed methods research, DMP, that has been made up, sort of made up with the best ideas brought together. And that was thanks to James' work. The other 2 are real. There's historical demography DMP template, or DMP that's been put out, and a digital humanities template, or data management plan that's been put out. So those will be coming soon. I've just finished chatting with our communications officer, and those should be posted to the Portage website under training resources either later today or early tomorrow in English, with French versions coming as soon as those translations come back and are formatted. So perhaps late this week or early next week. Turning to FAIR initiatives that we're involved in, making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. There are a number of initiatives we're involved in, and I'm sure that some of you are aware of our work with persistent identifiers, or PIDs, in particular with DOIs for data or journal publications through DataCite International. CRKN, the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, and Carl Portage have joined forces to create the DataCite Canada Consortium, which as of January 1st has taken over the work that was led previously by National Research Council to allow for the minting of DOIs from Canadian repositories. So we're very excited about that, and I think you all know that that is at 0 cost to repositories for this year because of funding from our Canary grant through ICET. Another persistent identifier that's of note is ORCID IDs, and as you know, a lot of people there's a lot of uptake on those, but it's a broad-based initiative. And looking forward to our emerging relationship with NDRIO, we do have a line item in our budget for joining the ORCID consortium. And so we're anticipating continued integration of ORCID into research data management initiatives. And there are a lot of other places where we could work in this space. The one that I find most interesting in this diagram is in the top right corner, the notion of having a PID for instruments. And coming from science, I know that there are instruments that gather all manner of information, and having a particular persistent ID for each type of instrument and each flavor of output would be, I think, really cool. But there are a lot of other options there as well. We're also looking at repository certification. Core Trust Seal is the main player in this space, and we are hoping to facilitate the certification of Canadian data repositories to the Core Trust Seal standard. Other players in this space include Research Data Canada's Best Practices designation, and the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, which is an international data repository and journal repository space. We're also looking at metadata, controlled vocabularies, and discovery. And for those of you who know me, you know that I really like OpenRefine. And OpenRefine, which is a cool online data wrangling utility, is being used to match up fast subject headings to those rather disparate subject headings that have been added to records, metadata records, by researchers at various repositories. So it's a very cool way of aligning sort of a disparate range of subject headings to a fast Library of Congress set of subject headings, which is, I think, a very cool project. We're also working to improve and expand metadata harvesting from Canadian repositories. And that work is with and through Lee Wilson and Kelly Stathis, our discovery and metadata coordinator. And not least of which, we've got this geospatial discovery project through Geodesy. This was originally funded by an RDC-RDM grant, but Portage is taking over that as of tomorrow. We're going to be working with them on this in a funded way for the next year. And the Geodesy project out of the University of British Columbia provides a geospatial way of finding data. So rather than typing in keywords to try and evoke geographic space, you'll be able to search by institution, by data type, place name, subject, but you'll also be able to use the map on the right-hand side of the screen here to zoom into geography and have all the data sets that fall in that geography show up in the results. So I zoomed into Kingston on this map, and a whole range of things came up, 12 of them, as you can see. And all of those are within the bounding of the map that I've zoomed into. And if I zoom in a little bit more, it shows you the geographic area that's actually covered by that search, provides you with some metadata. It's telling you it's from Lake Opinicon, the Queen's University Biological Station, and it gives you an opportunity to download the original shapefile that is associated with that data deposit. It's a very cool way of approaching discovery of research data. There's also some work on interoperability. FURDR was in fact selected in a competitive process to receive support from FAIR's FAIR in Europe to improve international interoperability of research data. Sensitive data is another area that we're working on through one of our expert groups. They're looking at glossary of sensitive data terms and made good progress on that. They're defining risks related to the roles of individuals in projects. They've been working on developing deposit-friendly text for ethics and informed consent and data access agreements. And we're also looking to promote and work with Chandra Kavanagh from Memorial University on a number of things that she's developed, including a research data risk matrix. So we're pleased to see that as well. Looking further at sensitive data, we're continuing to work with Indigenous research, and there's a report that just came out and I draw your attention to it. It's called Setting New Directions to Support Indigenous Research and Research Training in Canada. And any work that we do in this space is certainly going to follow and work with the philosophy set forward in this document, which I found the most compelling phrase in this was "nothing about us without us." And so I think that's going to be one of the driving forces for us in the work that we do within sensitive data related to Indigenous research. And there is a lot of work that still needs to be done in this space. We also have some sensitive data work happening with and through Simon Fraser University, who received internal funding. This is not Portage funded, but it's internally from Simon Fraser funded FURDR aligned project to support sensitive data. And I'm going to dive into stuff that I know how to say, but I don't necessarily know what it means here. And that is, they're looking at exploring the viability of zero knowledge encryption in an RDM context. And I have only the vaguest idea of what that means. And developing tools to encrypt packages at the time of deposit, that makes sense. And supporting metadata only reviews and discovery of sensitive data sets, which is another way of approaching the notion of curating sensitive data without exposing it unnecessarily to data breach. Other areas of activity include preservation workflow. Our preservation coordinator, Beth, is working hard with the Secretariat and the Preservation Expert Group to develop a preservation workflow, and that work is progressing well. There's a national network of curation support being developed, and I think you will all have seen an email from Erin Clary, our curation coordinator, announcing the launch of the draft report from the Canadian Data Curation Forum that was held in Hamilton back in October of last year. We're doing a number of training outreach activities, not least of which these webinars and our water cooler chats and other initiatives. There's work that's made, there's good progress been made on governance of Dataverse and FURDR as well. We're involved on an OCL Scholars Portal regional library consortium Dataverse governance body, as well as work being developed to revise the further governance structure to be more nimble. We're also working on increased engagement with our domain partners, domain repository partners, and that is with and through the work of the Data Repositories Expert Group chaired by Bo Wanschneider, the CIO at the University of Toronto. And so there's good work happening there, and we've got really good representation on that expert group from the domains. Now turning to data management and NDRIO. As many of you know, this is the sort of messy current state of things in Canada with respect to the various components of digital research infrastructure. That top now circled section has now been simplified down to NDRIO taking over data management, research software, and advanced research computing, and digital network for research and education is still the purview of CANARY. And the key transition priorities for Portage into the new digital research organization are national data stewardship support, providing coordinated support at the national level, and RDM platform support and development with many of the platforms that we've already discussed here today. We are pleased to let you know that we do have a full slate of people working with us in the Portage Secretariat. I think some of you have met these people before, and I feel a little bit badly. I had, at the last time I presented this, a little pop-up of Lee Wilson's daughter, Nora, who was born, I think, 2 months ago now. And I just decided to take it out, but I may reintroduce her later as she starts growing and changing over time. We might be able to have a Nora over the years kind of approach to this. But Lee is still smiling and still yawning. In terms of RDM platform support and development, our partners are many. And the institutions that we are working with to deliver to the Canadian RDM community supports for research data management include the University of Alberta and for the work on the DMP assistant. And as I said, that work is progressing well. The University of Toronto, who is working with OCL Scholars Portal, which is the sort of the consortium of 21 universities across Ontario to deliver a national instance of Dataverse. And the University of Saskatchewan, who is the project lead for FURDR, and working closely with 2 host sites at Simon Fraser and at the University of Waterloo. We are also circling back to the University of Toronto, working with SciNet, which is a Compute Canada node at the University of Toronto on FURDR archival storage, working with them on a preservation processing pipeline. So there are 5 institutions working with us currently, and we're adding partners as we go, University of British Columbia being one with the Geodesy project. But there are a lot of other folks that we lean on to help you deliver, help us deliver to you the services that we're able to do. So looking at the timeline for transition, this is sort of a way of trying to explain where we are and where we're going. Where we are currently is under CANARY directed ICED directed funding flowing through CANARY, and that will take us through to September. We're in the midst of submitting a budget under a corporate plan, and that budget is actually due by midnight tonight, so we'll see how we do on that. Once we're off this call, we'll be racing back to other meetings to try and work that out. And that is going to take us through to March 31st of next year. And that too is directed funding to Portage to support data management in Canada. During the next 8 months, there will be work on strategic plan briefing notes to the board and to NDRIO. And those briefing notes on data management will inform the strategic plan that the board develops to carry us forward through from April 1st of 2021 through to March 31st of 2024. So it's a 3-year window there, and there will be NDRIO funding. At that point, we would be fully under NDRIO and not working, as we understand it now, not working through Carl on managing our work with data management. And through all of this, we'd be coordinating and aligning with ARC research software and our network partners at Canary. So looking forward, we want to work on improving discovery, developing and deploying a national RDM training strategy. And that's work that Melanie is making good progress on. Growing a national network of data curation support. And again, Aaron and the work of the Canadian Data Curation Forum back in the fall has led to where we are today. Supporting the evolution of national preservation services. That's the work of Beth Mazouk and our preservation expert group. Addressing issues related to sensitive data, and that is still ongoing. And again, there's a lot of work happening there. Working closely with domains to address discipline-specific issues. Advancing repository certification efforts in Canada, and helping repositories meet those standards. And facilitating data management, joining ARC research software as part of NDRIO. So with that, I'd like to thank our partners for all of the help that they've provided to us over the course of the last numbers of years. And at this point, I'll say thank you to all. And I think we're probably prepared to take some questions, but we also have, I believe, some polls that are going to be pushed to us. And I think those polls relate to webinar ideas, the online conference, and any other ideas you may have. So with that, I will turn it back over to Melanie. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so we are ready to take questions. So feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom, or you can also raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question out loud. So please go ahead and do that. And in the meantime, I'll get set up to do our next poll. So our next poll that we'll be launching is about our webinar topics. So we're going to be asking you, which of the following webinar topics would you be most interested in? And that should be showing up shortly. Can everyone see that poll? Just one moment, I'm going to relaunch it.
Still not seeing it.
Okay, I'm going to end this poll and we'll go to the questions and we'll try this again later. I was having a couple of views, but maybe it's not showing up for everyone.
So is somebody going to feed the questions to me, or am I carrying?
Yes, I'll open up those questions and we will take a look at those. So the first question that we have is from Gwen Bird. Can we hear more about repository certification in Canada? You quickly mentioned two options. Can you tell us more about repository certification in Canada?
Okay, you can still hear me, I take it?
Yes.
Okay. The main approach that we're looking at following is the Core Trust Seal approach. And I mentioned Research Data Canada's best practices designation, which is not a certification, but rather a best practice designation for any of a number of aspects of data management. But from the repository perspective, we are looking at Core Trust Seal. The core, the Coalition of Open Access Repositories group, we're involved with a small working group that they've got that was looking at a lighter weight certification, and they're concerned internationally. I should start my video. There we go. That core group is looking with an eye to smaller countries lower on the socioeconomic scale, of helping them manage to get some measure of certification for their repositories in the absence of the funding or resources that might be available in first world countries and such. So that's an interesting project. But my understanding is that the Core Trust Seal folks, first of all, that their standard is something that many of our Canadian repositories should be striving for. And secondly, that they are looking at developing a lighter weight or sort of a lower bar for certification in the context of the Core Trust Seal. And I think that from Portage's perspective, we really do want to align with the work of the Core Trust Seal for most or all Canadian repositories. That would certainly be our inclination at this time. Hope that answers your question, Gwen.
Is there any other follow-up questions related to repository certification while we're speaking on that topic? Feel free to put it in the chat.
Yeah, from Raina, Raina, who is involved with Core Trust Seal, and she's at UVic and part of Oceans Network, I think. She's saying it might be helpful to acknowledge that Core might be redundant in a sense because Core Trust Seal does offer reduced rates for developing nations. And I honestly don't think it's a question of the cost of the certification per se. It may be, and I'm not an expert in this, but it may be more attaining the standards that are set within the certification itself. And so again, that could well be another topic for a webinar, looking at Core Trust Seal, the requirements, how we can help people attain that. And to that end, I will say that we do have funding being included in our budget for the April 1st to March 31st of 2021 timeframe. So there is potential there for us to work with and through and for repositories in attaining certification. So that's certainly one of our goals.
There is a question from Nick about timelines that you could speak to related to certification.
I don't think we've got any timelines per se. I do know that the tri-agency policy has as its second requirement for researchers, if you will, the notion of depositing data into a reputable repository, whatever that means. And I'm sure that if a repository had Core Trust Seal, then it would certainly pass muster with the tri-agencies. So I'm thinking that we would certainly want to make headway on repository certification between now and when the first tri-agency funded research data has to find a place to be deposited or needs to be flagged within a data management plan as where you're going to put your data. So I really do think that we want to make progress on this over the next 12 to 18 months. Again, our funding starts in earnest on October 1st under the NDRIO timeline for the corporate plan. And we have 6 months under that funding after April 1st to make some progress on that. But we certainly see this as a priority for data management within NDRIO as well.
And another question, will Canada be involved with Research Organization Registry? From Tim.
I'm really not the best person to ask that question. I've got broad knowledge in a lot of stuff, but not necessarily the depth that I need to be able to answer that kind of questions. I do think that we have, and in fact, I've got a slide deck which pushes beyond the DOIs and beyond ORCID and includes ROAR and includes some of the other high profile or more likely to be gain traction PIDs that are out there. And so I would think that, yes, we do have work happening in the research organization registry space. It is certainly part of our work to make things interoperable. And I think that the more PIDs that we can adopt and promote the use of, the better. And the ROAR, as I mentioned, it's been promoted enough to be on one of my slide decks that I didn't include in this presentation just because of the timing. But certainly, I think it could be looked at in more detail in a future webinar if you're so inclined.
Okay, and the next question. Will ORCID funding mean each institution will get an institutional membership to ORCID so we can get ORCID to help us track our ORCID members?
There too, I am not as familiar with ORCID as my colleague Lee Wilson is, and I'm sure there are others on this call who probably answer that question, but my sense is that we would be seeking membership nationally at least, and I do not know whether that results in institutions obtaining membership as a consequence. I'm just not sure how that would work, whether it's a national membership or not. So I can certainly, if we can take note of that question, I can look into it and we can get back to the community on that.
Thank you. And the next question, are other disciplines integrating the way oceanography is? What are you hearing about data integration from the biology, environment, chemistry communities?
I am not sure what is meant by integration. If you mean breaking down silos and sharing data and doing cross-disciplinary research, I'm not sure that I can answer that. If there's some other sense of that question, then maybe you could follow up with in the chat and say if you could explain that a bit more.
Thanks. And the next question, can you give more details about National RDM training plan that you mentioned that I, Melanie, am working on?
Yes, that Melanie is working on. So I can channel Melanie or I can turn the floor over to Melanie, and that would probably be the wisest thing I could do. So Melanie, if you want to make a few comments on that, that'd be fine.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that a little bit. So currently right now I am working on a national training plan, as Jeff mentioned. This entails a few different things. I think primarily what this has involved so far is looking at what currently exists. So identifying what's going on in the training landscape Canadian-wise. So looking at especially the work of the training expert group at Portage. They've done a lot of work already in terms of creating a lot of that base content that I'm sure many of you are familiar with the brief guides, the primers, the modules, and I'm sure some of you have met members of the training expert group at your campus as they've provided on-demand training in person as well. So in addition to that, I've been looking at what's been going on nationally, internationally, in the United States and in Europe and in Australia, and really trying to get a sense of how we can harness all of what's happening around the world and across Canada to think about what the Canadian program more holistically. So really trying to identify where we want to go in the future in terms of how we want to present that content, looking at how we bring that together in terms of a training platform that Portage can support, and then also looking to the future in terms of how we can create dynamic content like videos, and also looking at how we can create train the trainer content. So something that we're looking forward to creating, and we've begun a little bit of work around, is the idea of workshops in a box. So that's something I'm really excited in terms of building capacity amongst trainers across Canada, is being able to provide some of those core training materials, such as a lesson plan, a presentation, activities, all of those things together. And throughout this, really trying to sort of bring that together under a cohesive plan that will be guided by our vision for what that means in terms of what principles we'll be going back to and such. I will say that this is sort of in the more early stages. I'm working with the Portage Secretariat, and then this is going to move to the training expert group, and eventually this will move to a broader community for feedback. But that's just to hopefully give you a little bit of a sense of where I'm going with this currently. If you have more questions, I'm happy to answer those, or you're welcome to email me and I'm happy to chat about it.
And I'm going to switch into French here, but deux de nos buts avec ça, c'est de faire certain que les ressources qu'on développe sont bilingues, disponibles en anglais, en français, puis accessibles. We are looking to make sure that our training resources are bilingual, and to date we've been very good at making sure the primers and the brief guides and so on are available in both official languages. But taking the workshop in a box example, we would want to be sure that we develop content that can be deployed in both English and in French. And so we would certainly turn to our colleagues in Quebec and elsewhere across the country who require or would like French language resources to reach out to Melanie, and we can work with you and for you. The other piece is accessibility. A lot of what we've put up right now has not been accessible under national and or under provincial rules for accessibility, and we are really determined and dedicated to making sure that our content is as accessible as it can be made. So work is happening to that end, and Melanie has been very good about that and helping us achieve that, and that's going to continue to sort of color the work that we're doing with our training resources.
And another question, when will we pick a real name for the new organization?
Oh my goodness. As soon as I saw the NDRIO logo, which I think I've baked into the slide showing you the landscape for the new DRI, I thought, oh no, as soon as you've got letterhead, you're committed. So I'm not quite sure what they're going to do there. My sense is that there is a strong understanding and desire that something new come up. For those of you who haven't heard the joke, DRI is the digital research infrastructure. So somebody, actually Laurie McMullen, the executive director of Cuccio, the IT people, she said we should call it Canada Dry. And I can't hear you chuckling, but for those of you who have not heard that before, you might find that amusing. But I'm not sure that that one's going to hold sway. I suppose new digital research infrastructure organization could become National Digital Research Infrastructure Organization, and it would still be NDRIO. So who knows? It's going to be up to the board. And by the way, the board was elected, 15-member board was elected unanimously on March 15th, and March 15th is like 2 and a bit weeks ago, and it seems like forever because it was the last thing that I ever got in a vehicle, drove up to Ottawa and attended, and it was like things were sort of pseudo-normal. And the next day, the NHL shut down, the NBA shut down, and all these other things shut down. So it was our last hurrah of normalcy. And I think in some ways, a lot of us were grateful that we did hold it because it was, I think, a celebration of all the good work that's been happening with and through the folks who've been working in data management, ARC, and research software toward the launch of the new org. And it was, again, the board is very strong. For those of you who don't know, we do have 2 strong voices, among others, but 2 strong voices for data management in Donna Bourne-Tyson, a former president of CARL and university librarian at Dalhousie, and Martha Whitehead, former university librarian at Queen's University and now university librarian at Harvard. So we're very grateful to have that board in place, and I think that we're going to be well served by them going forward.
Thank you. And the next question, can you speak more to the vision of future integration of RDM support with research software support?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do anything on computers without software. And so the notion of data management somehow being immune from collaborating with and working with research software that's not realistic. So the work that's happened so far in this space has been funded by CFI, by some research funding through Canary, both broad research software funding, but also targeted RDM research software funding. And it's also been funded by Compute Canada. And so by coalescing the research software activity area under NDRIO, and having it sit with advanced research computing and data management, I am incredibly optimistic that we will be able to work more closely with them on a range of software-related initiatives tied to data management. And the one that I think comes most to mind for me is this notion of research management information and interoperability. Our researchers are already burdened with a whole load of things that they need to do. And if we can demonstrate to them that the work that they put in one tool, one space, can be repurposed and appropriately reused in another, and they don't have to type stuff in twice for grants and then for data management plans and then to respond to the needs of their institution for institutional record keeping. If we can coalesce in some way through software that kind of information, and this speaks again to the PIDs with the RORs and the ORCID IDs and so on, I think that we'll be really doing ourselves, all of us a service. And so yeah, research software, both from the lab bench perspective, but also from the larger data management, managing research data perspective is going to be all important, I think. And I think the opportunity to cooperate within NDRIO will greatly enhance that.
Thank you. And another question, can you please share the slide of priorities again? Would you be able to share that slide, Jeff?
I can try.
Thanks. And while Jeff's doing that, if there are additional questions, again, please feel to drop them in the Q&A box or in the chat.
I'm just gonna, again, I know it's asynchronous here, but is it the looking forward slide? Let me just bring it up, and if it is, we can say that that's what it is.
Yes, and the deck of slides will be available as well as the recording from today, just so everyone's aware. We'll be sending those out shortly.
I'm just having to get my screen's cleared out. There we go.
I'm going to try relaunching that poll as well shortly.
Let me just see if I can get this screen to show. Is that the screen you were thinking of?
I think that was what I assumed. Yes, Felicity says yes, that's what she was looking for. So great, so we can share that with everyone if they're interested, if there's things here that you would like to ask questions about. So another question, what does working closely with domains look like?
Well, we are, as I mentioned, working with the Data Repositories Expert Group, which is itself composed of data specialists, a CIO as chair, and a number of representatives from domains to look at ways to reach out to our domain partners. One of the things that's going to come out of, I think, and I hope, relatively short order, out of the NDRIO will be a researcher council. And that researcher council is going to be a fairly large and as broadly representative a council composed of researchers as the NDRIO board sees fit to make it. And that will be, have a direct line to the board and will be populated, I believe, as well by other members, so people from data management, from ARC, and from research software, however that is staffed, so that we can hear and see what the researchers are expressing in terms of their interests and priorities. And so, in terms of that aspect going forward, the new org is, I think, well positioned to address domain concerns. In the short term, with Portage, we are, again, through our the budget that we're working on right now, looking for ways to reach out and help domains. One of the line items we put in, because as you can imagine, the news that you've seen on the television and such every day is changing, and everything that changes with COVID and all the rest has influenced everything that we do. So you could imagine that a travel budget envisioned in December of 2019 to send a range of Secretariat members to various conferences and training and so on is no longer the same travel budget as it was envisioned in December of 2019. So money from some of those areas is being reprofiled to other initiatives. And one of them that we are looking at, for example, is a response to the COVID-19 pandemic and providing funding to support curation into appropriate repositories in standard and best practice following ways of research arising from these funded projects. Sort of following on our announcement last week that we were working as a secretariat to try and reach out to CIHR, we are also looking to find funding that would start as soon as our budget is approved to support that kind of initiative. So we are also cooperating on that front with Research Data Canada and Mark Leggett to ensure that we are able to find ways of deploying whatever funds we have and perhaps leveraging other funds to make that happen in a more meaningful way. Again, more on that when we know more. Right now, nothing's been approved and signed, so we have to wait on that.
And a follow-up to that, does this presume that domains already have shared data management infrastructure in place?
No, I'm going to have to interpret that question. I mean, some domains do. Some domains have well-established repository and discovery and culture of deposit. And you can think of the astronomers as being a very good example of that. Others maybe less so. For those who do have repositories and such, we would be working with and for them to ensure that their repositories are following best practices and so on and are aiming for certification. For those disciplines that don't have or don't have as mature an RDM repository capacity and maybe a mindset of best practices and standards, we would certainly want to work with them and see them consider using national multidisciplinary repository options like Furter, like Dataverse, but we're certainly not we're not being prescriptive in this. It's really just a question of what fits best. We would want to work closely with the local RDM support on campuses, if that exists, to ensure that local sensibilities are taken into account. So if there's a local solution, then that could be considered as well. So we are working as broadly as we can with these researchers and research groups to achieve the best practices, whether they're, again, well established or whether they're less established in data management.
Thank you. And mindful of the fact that we're just after 2 o'clock now, we do have one last question to be answered. Is the National Network of Data Curation Support going to look something like the US Data Curation Network?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think that if you read the report that was again released just today, draft report on the Data Curation Forum that was in Hamilton back in the fall, I think you will see that there are probably a lot of similarities there in terms of approach. This shouldn't be surprising in that Erin Clary comes from the DCN with another role with Dryad. She's worked with both of those before coming here. She's got a long history of working in curation. So yeah, I think that there are certainly a lot of lessons to be learned from the DCN, and Canada is trying to do that.
Thank you. So we are now coming to the close of our webinar. Again, this webinar has been recorded and we will be sharing that back with the attendees and anyone that wasn't able to get on the call today. So if you have a colleague that you maybe have been in touch with that wasn't able to get on today, we did have a little bit of technical difficulties with our caps today, but we will be sending out a recording as well as the slides within probably a day or so. I will be putting in the chat, we do have two webinars next week, the same webinar, once being hosted in English and another time, and the other will be hosted in French. I'll just be sharing the links to those if you enjoyed today and are interested in joining next week, as well as a link to the survey for today. Thank you all for your patience and joining us on this adventure for our first webinar, and we hope to see you all again next week.
Thanks, everyone.